Going to begin this particular Zoom session number 3 on anatomy, physiology, HEAR 120. Let me get my act together here. Anyway, last week we covered the outer ear and we just about finished it, and we got to the end of that section, Unit 2, the outer ear. Unit 1 we covered, I believe, January 16. It was an overview of the entire ear. Last week, January 23, we got into the outer ear specifically and got toward the very end of it. And I said last week, well, I think what we'll do this week, January 30, our third Zoom session, is continue where we left off. In other words, quickly finish the outer ear, and then we will move on to the middle ear, Unit 3. All right, here we go. Share screen. Grab the outer ear particularities here. So we've got, let's pick this one here, outer ear anatomy physiology. We'll go to the end of it, right to where we got done, okay? Just about. So I'm going to just kind of repeat this little business here, physiology of the outer ear. And at the same time, I'm going to pull up the particular PowerPoint slides that have some meaning in regard to that. The outer ear canal, physiology. In other words, what it does is basically this. You're getting you're adding 20 decibels across the top, especially for these frequencies. And it's very important that we understand and tie this together with what we'll be covering and what we have been covering in acoustics. Because acoustics and anatomy are two underlying pillar or foundations, underlying pillars of the entire hearing instrument sciences profession. These are the theoretical underpinnings. Let's look at the outer ear canal physiology. What does the outer ear do as opposed to its anatomy? Well, we all know that the outer ear is a quarter wave resonator. So, yeah, it's mainly a funnel to gather sound. I'm highlighting here. The resonance of the concha is between 5,000 and 6,000 hertz. I would put a star by that. And it is a quarter wave resonator, external auditory meatus. It is a closed tube at one end, much like my coffee cup. Open at one end, closed at the other end, and objects like that tend to resonate with sound waves 4 times their length. Hence, they are called quarter wave resonators. Okay, well, the ear canal is about to be exact, 2.3 centimeters long in an adult. Well, remember what a centimeter is, the width of your fingernail. Or in the USA, you'd call it about an inch. 2.5 centimeters to an inch. Okay? An inch is about 2.5 centimeters. I'm going to round this 2.3 to just to make it 2.5. It's just easier. Okay? Just kind of look at it like that. So it's going to resonate to sound waves 4 times the length. So if I say 2.5 centimeters here, and therefore it's going to resonate with sound waves 4 times as long, basically, let's think in broad strokes, okay? It's going to resonate to frequencies that are, well, let's figure it out. Let's figure it out. From acoustics, wavelength is speed of sound over the frequency. Frequency is speed of sound over wavelength. Okay, well, we know the wavelength. It's 10 centimeters. What's the speed of sound in air? 340 meters per second. Frequency is speed of sound over the wavelength. Okay, 340 meters per second divided by 10 centimeters. Hold it. You can't divide meters by centimeters. It's all got to be the same. Numerator and denominator of your fraction. The top and bottom numbers can't be apples and oranges. They've got to both be apples or both be oranges. So let's change 10 centimeters to meters. And in good old metric, 10 centimeters is 0.1 meter. Okay, 340 divided by or over top of 0.1. Do the math. Get my calculator here. 340 divided by 0.1 equals 3,400 hertz. 3,400 hertz. But the external auditory meatus is not made out of glass. Okay? The external auditory meatus is made out of flesh and bone, and therefore that 3,400 hertz is kind of fudged a bit. Oh, something strange. There you go. It's kind of fudged a bit. Notice how it's spread out. It's not, you don't have a line just going at 3,400 hertz. Basically, it's spread out a bit. So basically, the peak resonance is 2,700 hertz, and it goes all the way out to 4,000, and as low as 1,500. Look at this. You're getting a gift of 20 decibels added to these frequencies, precisely so that the high frequencies of speech are naturally lifted by 20 dB. These are the softest sounds. Okay, are given a 20 decibel lift because of the gift of the outer ear resonance. Very important to understand that. That's why I go over it with some detail here. And that's what highlights, that's why I highlighted this in black. You need to read that carefully. What's the benefit here? It helps us hear the soft, high frequency, unvoiced consonants of speech. This is why our outer ears have the weird shape that they do. And this is why the external auditory meatus has its particular length. In other words, the outer ear is made for speech. If we did not speak, we'd likely have differently shaped ears. All right, next, occlusion effect. Your own voice sounds louder when your ear is plugged. Try it once. Hum. Okay? Your voice is louder when your ear is plugged. Go ahead and talk while plugging one ear. You should hear your voice loudest in the ear that you plug. That's called the occlusion effect. Okay? And it plagues people who wear hearing aids, because when you're wearing a hearing aid, you're plugging up the ear. That's why hearing aids are given a vent, a hole in the hearing aid to let some of the loud sounds out. So let's look at when you think of it, tape recorded voice. When you hear a recording of your own voice, why does it sound weird only to you? It's because others hear you only through the air. But you hear yourself through the bone as well as through sound waves traveling through air. Okay? So others hear you by air conduction, sound waves traveling through air. You hear your own voice by both air conduction, sound waves traveling through the air, as well as through the bone of your skull. That's why you hear your own voice louder and richer. Now, the lows of your voice, put a star by this. There are two things with the occlusion effect. There's the lay definition, the common everyday Joe definition, and there's the professional definition. Okay? The lay definition is your own voice gets louder when your ear is plugged. Now the professional definition. Here it is, where I'm highlighting low frequencies of your voice resonate the mass of your skull. Lows resonate mass, highs resonate stiffness. Okay, so, all right, so the lows of your voice, the vowel sounds, all the voice sounds resonate the mass of your skull, which in turn resonates the cartilaginous portion of your ear canal. Notice how you can wiggle that up and down, just like the bottom of your nose, the cartilaginous portion. So lows of the voice, number one, resonate the bone, resonate the mass of the skull. Okay? So, and then that in turn resonates the cartilaginous portion of your ear canal. Plugging your ear prevents that from escaping. And why don't we make this a 5-point thing? Write it down in the margin. 1, low frequency. Number 2, bone conducted sounds. Okay, voice through your skull to your ears, to your inner ear. So low frequency bone conducted sounds resonate the mass of your skull, which in turn resonates the cartilaginous portion of your ear canal. Plugging your ear prevents that from escaping. The 5-point thing about the occlusion effect. Memorize it. All right. And then there's a tuning fork test called the Bing tuning fork test. The Bing tuning fork test. At any rate, the Bing tuning fork test is when they take a tuning fork and go boom, and then they put it on the bone behind your ear. Feel the round bone behind your ear. That's called your mastoid bone, M-A-S-T-O-I-D, mastoid. And they put that tuning fork against the mastoid bone, and you hear the sound by bone conduction. And then they plug your ear and unplug your ear. Plug your ear, unplug your ear. You should hear your voice louder when your ear is plugged. That's the occlusion effect. If you've got middle ear pathology, which we'll discuss in the next unit, you won't get the occlusion effect. The only time you get the occlusion effect is if your middle ears, behind your eardrums, is normal. Okay? Now, do this thing with me again, and I'll stop sharing for a second. Let's talk about the occlusion effect. Okay, when I talk, my voice is louder in the ear that I plug. But if I say the letter S, not much difference, because S is high pitch. Is low pitch. Remember the occlusion effect. Low frequency bone conducted sounds, not high frequency, lows. So only the sounds from your throat, your vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and the letters M, N, D, B, any voiced sounds are louder and lower. And those are the sounds for which you get the occlusion effect. If I say S, I can't hear a difference. But if I hear my voice louder in the ear that I plug. Okay? Occlusion effect. Stop sharing or start sharing. Here we go. Bing tuning fork test is based on the occlusion effect. Bone conducted sound is loudest when the ear is plugged. Most prominent with low frequency sounds. How they do it, there it is. Okay, its occlusion effect is for people who have normal hearing will experience occlusion effect. Also people with hearing loss, like elderly people who have hearing loss, because they have sensory neural loss, not conductive loss. Sensory neural loss is damage to the inner ear, not the middle. Only people who have damage to the middle ear, they will not experience the occlusion effect. Everyone else will. Capiche? All right, good. And when we look at disorders of the outer ear, you've got 3 or 4 here, okay? And we showed you all kinds of pictures last week. Stenosis, we said, is a partial closing of the ear canal due to wax, due to infection, swelling, due to a bug in your ear, God knows what. A partial closing of the ear canal is stenosis. Can be caused by osteoma, swimmer's ear. Okay? We saw pictures of that last week. Atresia is complete closure of the external auditory meatus, usually found in Treacher-Collins syndrome, and I showed you pictures of that last week. So it's that's middle ear. I think that's middle ear stuff. We don't want to see that. You want to see this one here. So when you're looking at atresia, okay, complete blockage of the outer ear. And we showed you all kinds of these pictures. Here's atresia again. Okay, so you remember these pictures we showed you from last week. Okay, osteoma, we called that a bony, benign tumor of the outer ear canal. I think we showed you a picture of that one as well. Let's go over to here, and I think you may see, there you go, bony exotoses. Okay, swimmer's ear. All right, swimmer's ear. tiny growths of bone underneath in the bony portion of the ear canal, meant to try and protect the eardrum from cold water. Swimmer's ear. Okay, enough on that. We've got to move on to the middle ear. It's 1:45 Pacific time. We are 25% of our way through this Zoom session, and we said at the outset that we would finish off the outer ear, and that's exactly what we did. Let's move now to the middle ear. Middle ear anatomy and physiology we will cover this week and next week. Okay, we're going to cover both and get her done, and then we move on to the inner ear. So we spent basically one Zoom session last week focusing totally on the outer ear and a piece of today on the outer ear, the rest of today on the middle ear, and all of next week on the middle ear. Let's look at it. The middle ear consists of the inner skin of the tympanic membrane. We recall that the TM, or eardrum, has 3 layers of skin, okay, which represent the 3 main embryonic layers: endoderm, mesoderm, ectoderm. It's the only piece of the body that retains those original 3 layers of tissue. Very unique in that regard. And a second point is the closed middle ear space. Closed, like government offices. Closed unless forced open. Okay? The only time the middle ear space opens is when you swallow or yawn or blow your nose really hard. Otherwise, it is a closed space. It's surrounded by mucus, surrounded by porous mastoid bone, but what I mean by surrounded by mucus is the skin is slimy, surrounding the middle ear space, but the middle ear space is filled with air. It has the 3 tiniest bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, the ossicular chain, going through the middle ear space, which is air-filled. Eustachian tube connects the middle ear space to the back of your throat, to your tonsil areas, one on each side. You've got the middle ear ossicles, malleus, incus, stapes, and the ligaments holding those ossicles in place. You have 2 middle ear muscles, the stapedius muscle, which is connected to the 7th facial nerve, Roman numeral VII. Okay, that's the nerve that when you smile, that pulls your cheeks. Okay, that nerve also controls the stapedius muscle and the tensor tympani muscle, which is connected to the tensor tympani. The stapedius muscle is connected to the stapes bone, and the tensor tympani muscle is connected to the tensor tympani. All right, is connected to the malleus, I should say. Okay, so it tenses the tympanic membrane because the malleus is attached to the eardrum. The stapedius muscle tenses or tightens the stapes. So the tensor tympani is innervated by the 5th cranial nerve. Remember, you have 12 cranial nerves, 10 and 2, 12 pairs of cranial nerves. The 8th pair is the auditory nerve, the 8th is the hearing nerve. Okay, so the 8th pair is the hearing nerve. The 5th pair is the trigeminal, and it controls mostly feeling on your cheeks, and it also controls feeling on your teeth on the top and feeling on the teeth on your jaw, your mandible. And it has an ear portion, 3 portions, trigeminal. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and it's the tensor tympani muscle is the weaker of the 2 muscles. Even though it's the larger, it is the weaker. The stapedius is the smallest, but it's the strongest. Okay, looking at the parts of the middle ear, and we'll show you a picture here first. Okay, middle ear. Tympanic membrane, eardrum. Remember that this has 3 layers actually. It's only showing you 2 here, but the outer layer, the very middle layer, and the inner layer. Here's the manubrium, the handle of the malleus. This whole thing is the malleus. The handle part here is called the manubrium of the malleus. And look at the ligaments holding this in place. And the malleus bone is attached to the back of the eardrum. You'd have to literally tear it off. Okay? The second bone is the incus, and it has two landmarks, a short process and a long process. The malleus has two areas, the manubrium, the handle, and then the rest of the bone. Okay, the manubrium of the malleus is the ball here. The incus has the short process and the long process, and then the stapes or stirrup, stapes, has the neck and the crura, and then last of all, the foot plate. And the foot plate of the stapes fits into what is called the oval window. And the oval window is the entrance to the cochlea. Okay? So the middle ear is a system. Never think that the eardrum hits the malleus and the malleus hits the incus and the incus hits the stapes. They move as a unit. It's called the ossicular chain. The ossicular chain, malleus, incus, stapes. Malleus is attached to the tympanic membrane. The stapes, the foot plate, is inserted into the oval window. And when the oval window is pushed in, the round window bulges out. And look at where the round window is there. So when this bulges, it pushes in, that bulges out. And this whole area is filled with air. How big is that area? About like a sugar cube. About that size in area. A cubic centimeter or a little bit more, small. And then here's the eustachian tube. Look at the bottom. The eustachian tube going down to the throat. Okay, so the pieces and parts of the middle ear are important to know. Here's another picture showing you pieces of the middle ear. And here you've got the eardrum. Here you have the manubrium of the malleus. Now they're showing you that it's attached right here at the umbo and that it's attached at the top. They're not showing that it's attached here. I don't know how accurate that is. Here you've got the incus bone with the short process and the long process, the neck of the stapes, the crura, and the foot plate of the stapes. Here's the tensor tympani muscle. Now this slide is showing you the tensor tympani muscle, and this slide is showing you the stapedius muscle. So the stapedius muscle is attached onto the neck of the stapes. The tensor tympani muscle is attached to the malleus. Now, if we go back in pictures and look at what it says here, okay, at the top of here, the two middle ear muscles. Right beside this, in your notes, in your margin, okay, over here and over here where I'm telling you, write down acoustic reflex. Acoustic reflex. Now, what the heck is a reflex? I'll stop sharing for a second. A reflex is when you have no control over it. You have your legs crossed and a doctor taps your knee with a hammer. Boop. Okay? Or you put your hand on a hot stove. It's not like you sat and thought about it and said, I'd better remove my hand from the scalding stove or my skin will burn. It was a reflex. The message went up my arm to my spinal cord and right back out to my muscle to pull my arm away. Okay? Same with the acoustic reflex. A loud sound comes in the ear. Okay, if you have a loud sound coming in, those two bones, the two little muscles will pull. And when they pull, they temporarily make the middle ear less efficient. So let's look at that. They temporarily make the middle ear less efficient. So I'll go back a couple of slides so you can look. When the tensor tympani muscle pulls and the stapedius muscle pulls, that one here and this one here, they temporarily stiffen the ossicular chain. They make the middle ear less good at passing sound through. They're almost acting like a temporary earplug. The acoustic reflex. We'll get more on that next week in the physiology. Here's a schematic of the middle ear. Just a schematic. Eardrum, manubrium of the malleus, and the handle, and here's the rest of the malleus attached to the back of the tympanic membrane. Now look carefully. The malleus isn't attached to the whole back of the drum. It's just attached to the top half. And where does it end? At the umbo. Remember that word from last week? Umbo, U-M-B-O, the center of the drum. There's no bone connected to the bottom half of the eardrum. And here would be the tensor tympani muscle. Here's this incus. The incus, the short process and the long process. And it too has a ligament attaching it. And then you've got the stapedius muscle attached to the neck of the stapes. Here's the crura, and here's the foot plate of the stapes, fitting into the oval window. This is the bone between the oval window here and the round window here. And this bone is called the promontory. Promontory. P-R-O-M-O-N-T-O-R-Y, promontory. It's the bone between the oval windows and round window. And now you've got the eustachian tube. So you can label this slide if you want. Number 1, tympanic membrane. Number 2, the long process of the incus. Number 3, you can call this the oval window. Number 4, you could call that the eustachian tube. Here you've got the round window. Here's another picture showing you the middle ear space. Tympanic membrane, manubrium of the malleus, short process of the incus, long process of the incus, neck of the stapes, crura of the stapes, foot plate of the stapes in the oval window, cochlea over here, of course. Then you have the promontory, and then the round window. Now the round window is like my cheek. Okay? When the oval window pushes in, the round window bulges out. So the round window is not a hole so much, it's a membrane over the hole. Because you see the cochlea is filled with fluid. And if it wasn't sealed shut, the fluid would leak out. So the round window, the oval window. And then here is, of course, the eustachian tube going down. So let's look in our notes now at what we've covered here. Parts of the middle ear. Recall the temporal bone has 2 parts. The soft mastoid portion that houses the outer ear canal. And we said last week the mastoid bone is pneumatic, didn't we? P-N-E-U-M-A-T-I-C. It has lots of holes in it, lots of air pockets. Put your fingers behind your ear, put your finger behind your ear, and you're feeling that round bone. That's the mastoid bone. And that's one of 2 parts of the temporal bone of the skull. The mastoid portion of the temporal bone covers the outer ear canal as well as part of the middle ear space. And then you have the hard petrous portion. Peter, the rock. Petra is Greek for hard. And that portion of the temporal bone surrounds part of the middle ear space as well as it surrounds the whole middle ear. So if we were to draw it kind of looking like this, I guess I might say something that the malleus, the mastoid portion covers mainly the outer half of the ear canal, of the middle ear and the ear canal, and the petrous portion of the temporal bone surrounds more the cochlea, balance organs, and parts of the middle ear space. Not that one here, go to this one here. Okay, closed middle ear space is about 2 cubic centimeters. Never think you need to memorize this kind of stuff here because I couldn't care less. I wouldn't know what it was either. Mucous membrane lines the entire middle ear space, including the inside layer of the tympanic membrane and the eustachian tube. You've got a jugular vein underneath the floor of your middle ear space. Underneath the floor of your middle ear space, the jugular vein. You also have the carotid artery. Now, what's the difference between a vein and an artery? Let's check that out. Veins take blood back to the heart. Arteries carry blood from the heart. Okay? Everything is a two-way street. Arteries are more pumping. Poof, poof, poof. And the blood in arteries is crimson red. Red, red, red. Why? Because it's filled with oxygen. And that goes out to the tissues and muscles of the body, and it returns back to the heart used up. And when it's all the oxygen is used up, the blood is darker, and no longer is it bright red. It's almost bluish. Okay, so you've lost that crimson stuff, and veins don't pump, pump, pump. Veins kind of carry the blood back. Okay, so you have two things underneath your middle ear space, the jugular vein and the carotid artery, which is here. Okay, so basically, and then just so you know that, and then you have a couple of spaces. Now the spaces in these things are called epitympanic recess, additus ad antrum. Epitympanic recess is the middle ear space just above your eardrum and the malleus. The additus ad antrum is the area above the incus and the stapes. In other words, a little bit more medial than the epitympanic recess. So I guess in a picture you might show it. This would be the additus or this would be the epitympanic recess, and this would be the additus ad antrum. See, in anatomy, they even call spaces names. And again, showing you here, this could be called the epitympanic recess. This would be called the additus ad antrum. Spaces in anatomy are given names. Carotid artery. Chordae tympani nerve is a branch of the seventh facial nerve that happens to pass through the middle ear space. It can get in the way of middle ear surgery. It carries taste information from the front 2/3 of one side of the tongue. Better not cut that puppy when you're doing surgery. And the inner ear wall is the medial inner wall of the closed middle ear space. And there's its three parts: the oval window filled by the footplate of the stapes, the round window covered by a tough membrane, and the promontory bone, which is the landmark bump of bone between the oval and round windows. The landmark bump of bone right here, or in the schematic here, or over here, it's not seen, and over here, this would be the promontory. Oval window, promontory, round window. Not that one. I keep going to the wrong one. Here we go. Eustachian tube connects middle ear to the nasal pharynx. In English, connects your middle ears to the back of your throat. Cilia in the mucous lining of the eustachian tube are always moving particles down to the throat. The eustachian tube is closed unless swallowing or yawning or blowing your nose. It opens about once a minute while awake, about once every 5 minutes when asleep. Purpose: to equalize the air pressure on both sides of the drum. To equalize the air pressure here in the ear canal and this air here. You see, because this mucous lining is always absorbing oxygen, and your eustachian tube has to let in new air, otherwise you're going to get a vacuum in your middle ear space. So we try to always, this tube opens periodically when you yawn or swallow, and sometimes just by itself, but it allows new air to come into the middle ear space because air is always being absorbed by the mucous lining of the middle ear space. Remember, for your middle ear to work the best, air pressure has got to be even, Steven, on both sides of the eardrum. When it isn't, then Houston, you've got a problem, also known as an earache. And we'll look more at that as it goes by. Infant eustachian tubes are shorter, wider, and more horizontal. Babies' faces are flatter, and so their eustachian tubes are horizontal. Adult faces are longer, so our eustachian tubes are more vertical. So infection can't crawl up quite as easily from the throat. But in kids, it does, and it can. Okay, and that's why children get earaches and middle ear infections more than adults do. We'll cover that also later on. Just remember what it says here. Air pressure's got to be even, Steven, on both sides of the tympanic membrane for the middle ear to work optimally. Middle ear mucus lining absorbs oxygen. Eustachian tube alleviates negative air pressure. The middle ear ossicles, you've all read about that, so we've seen. We can carry on here and move along. Middle ear muscles, you know what those are too now. The stapedius muscle and the tensor tympani muscle. Remember, the stapedius muscle is the smaller but the strongest one. And right in your margin here, or you can see it here, it is innervated by the seventh facial nerve. That's the nerve that communicates with that muscle, telling that muscle to pull. The tensor tympani muscle is larger, but it's weaker. It's innervated by a weaker, more sensory cranial nerve, the fifth or trigeminal nerve. I know, it's weird. They call it the fifth, and yet it has 3 parts, so there's the word tri in it. Anyway, it's the fifth pair, but it happens to have 3 branches. Anyway, so, and the tensor tympani muscle is the nerve that tells it to contract is the fifth nerve. Physiology of the middle ear. So that's your anatomy of the middle ear, the pieces and the parts. And again, read what it says here under physiology. Important. Air pressure has to be equal on both sides of the tympanic membrane for the middle ear to optimally do its job. Put a star by that and put a star by this. Middle ear transduces or changes. Circle the word transduce. It's a big one in our field. Transduce means to change energy from one form to another form. What's a transducer? A microphone. A hunka burnin' love, okay? A microphone transduces sound wave energy into electrical energy. A speaker is a backward mic. It changes electrical energy into sound energy. Hearing aids have a microphone and they also have a receiver. Therefore, they have 2 transducers. One to change sound into electricity and the other one to change amplified electricity back into sound. Well, your ear is no exception. Your ear also is a series of transducers. Your middle ear transduces sound waves, compression, rarefaction, you know, your period and wavelength and all that crap. It changes sound waves into mechanical piston energy. And that mechanical piston-like energy pushes against the oval window. So let's look at the picture. This changes sound waves into piston energy, mechanical. So what does the middle ear do? It transduces sound waves into mechanical energy. When you go to the cochlea that we'll study in a couple of weeks, that takes that mechanical energy and it transduces it into hydraulic energy. And hydraulic energy involves water, fluid. And then inside the cochlea are these things called hair cells, and they transduce hydraulic energy into electricity. And electricity is the language your brain understands. Just like the retinas of your eyes, they transduce light into electrical energy, because electrical energy is the language your brain understands. So to the best of my knowledge, the middle ear has 3 transducers. The middle ear changing sound into mechanical energy, the inner ear changing mechanical energy into hydraulic energy, and then inside the inner ear, the hair cells changing hydraulic energy into electrical energy. Transduction of sound. Interesting. All right. Middle ear, put a star by this one too. The middle ear must overcome the impedance mismatch as sound goes from air to the fluid of the cochlea. Now, what the Sam Hill does that mean? Well, read the next line. Think of someone standing at the edge of a swimming pool, and the person is talking to you, and you have your head under the swimming pool. So you're swimming under the water, and I'm talking to you while standing outside at the edge of the pool. Are you going to hear me? Of course not, because my sound waves are going to bounce right off of the water. Well, the same thing would happen in the ear, because the cochlea is filled with fluid. And airborne sound isn't going to get in there. Okay, it's going to bounce off because it comes through the middle ear and it's changed into mechanical energy. But hey, water is a different medium. Remember, sound travels 4 times as fast through water than it does through air, but water's hard. If you do a belly flop off a diving board, it hurts because you've landed like smack. Okay, if you fall out of an airplane onto water, you'll die. It's just like hitting the ground. Water is more dense. So you can't. So sound waves are going to bounce off of water. So why do you have a middle ear? You have a middle ear because of this. Take your hand and push it against the side of your face. Here's your hand. Now, 1, 2, 3, push really hard. Stop. Now take your finger, put it against your cheek, and now push really hard against your finger. Hurts, didn't it? Left a dent in my cheek. Okay? That's why you have a middle ear. Middle ear takes sound that hits a big eardrum, and it converges it all onto the stapes footplate, which is smaller. You thereby have increased the sound pressure, and now it can activate a fluid-filled cochlea. Think of yourself lying on your back watching TV, and I'm your roommate, and I walk behind you and I put a big cinder block on your tummy. What are you going to say? Ugh, get that off of me. But what if I put a nail on the bottom of that cinder block and put it on your tummy? You'll take a dirt nap. You just died. Okay? Because now the force is converged onto a point, and it went right through you. That's how a knife cuts through bread. The force of your wrist upon a sharp, sharp knife, you've increased the pressure. It goes right through the bread. Pressure is force over an area. Force over a big area, not much pressure. Force over a small area, beaucoup pressure. That's why thin 10-speed bike tires have more air pressure than fat car tires, okay? So think about that on that same line of thought when you're talking about the middle ear. So here we go. Middle ear overcomes the impedance mismatch. And that just means sound is traveling through air and it hits another medium. Hey, if sound is traveling through air and it hits my head is another medium. Okay, my hand stops because I hit my head. That's an impedance mismatch. As sound goes from air to the fluid of the cochlea. So everything is for a reason. For the middle ear is what gives mammals like us exceptional hearing. Way better hearing than reptiles and birds because they don't have a middle ear. Okay, who knows? Maybe this is what helped the little rodent-like mammals escape the dinosaurs because they were big lizards. They couldn't hear worth a crap. They may have had a tympanic membrane at the edge, and they may have had a cochlea, but they didn't have a middle ear. Okay, so airborne sound was hard-pressed to activate that fluid-filled cochlea. And so there's another tuning fork test. You learned earlier in the outer ear, the Bing tuning fork test, B-I-N-G, and I'll go there and I'll ask you to put a star by that one because I'm going to ask you, okay, based on the occlusion effect. Now let's go to the middle ear notes because you have now a second tuning fork test. Now these tuning fork tests are tests that ear, nose, and throat physicians use. Us, the HISs, we don't use them very much, okay, but doctors do. And they use them because they can tell very easily if the person has a middle ear infection or if the hearing loss is sensory neural. Tuning forks are not that good at telling degree of loss, but they're excellent at telling whether you have conductive hearing loss, blockage of the passage of sound, or sensory neural loss, inner ear hair cell cochlea damage. So what did we say about the Bing tuning fork test? We said it's based on the occlusion effect. That means your voice is louder when your ear is plugged. And who is going to experience that? Normal hearing people and people with sensory neural hearing loss, which is cochlear hair cell damage. They too have nothing wrong with the middle ear. It's the 5% of people who have hearing loss. Only 5% of people with hearing loss have conductive hearing loss. And that's what children have with earaches, a blockage of sound being able to reach the cochlea. Excess wax in the outer ear, middle ear infection, stuff like that. Otosclerosis, that we'll talk about a bit next week. But basically, when you've got a blockage of sound getting to the inner ear, you have a conductive hearing loss, and that's only 5% of hearing loss. So now let's finish this by going to the middle ear notes and look at your second tuning fork test, the Rinne, R-I-N-N-E, Rinne. And that's an eloquent demonstration of what the middle ear adds, what it does. Because you'll hit the tuning fork, and I'll share screen, and put it on the mastoid bone. Yep, you're hearing through bone conduction. Take it off and hold it by your ear. Whoa, it's way louder. Hit it again. On the mastoid bone. Yeah, I hear that. Pull it away, hold it by your ear. Whoa, that's louder. Why is it louder? Because you've got that increase of sound pressure offered by the middle ear. Size of the drum compared to the tiny footplate of the stapes. Pressure is force over an area. And the very fact that you hear the air-conducted sound here much louder than you hear the bone-conducted sound is because when you have the air conduction and sound is coming into your ear, you're getting the benefit of that middle ear, okay? Because sound goes from the outer ear to that middle ear. So air conduction involves the middle ear. Bone conduction does not. It's bypassing the outer ear, and it's bypassing the middle ear, going straight into the cochlea. Okay? So the Rinne tuning fork test means air-conducted sound is louder than bone-conducted sound. And that is the most eloquent demonstration of the benefits of having a middle ear in the first place. So put a star by that. These notes, important. So let's summarize and finish here. There are 3 ways, and this is where I'll pick up next week when we begin again, okay? But I'm going to talk about this twice. Once at the end now, at nearing the end of our Zoom session today, and next week I'm going to be beginning with a review of exactly this again. So here we go. The middle ear overcomes that impedance mismatch in 3 ways, okay? In other words, airborne sound having a problem when it hits water, okay, that's the impedance mismatch. There are 3 main ways in which the middle ear helps to overcome that. Number 1, area of the tympanic membrane is 17 times larger than the footplate of the stapes. In other words, sound pressure level, SPL, collected over a large area of the eardrum is transferred onto a small area of the oval window. Don't memorize this, I couldn't care less. Just doesn't matter. Just memorize the top 2 lines. Number 2, the second way, the leverage action of the ossicles. The manubrium of the malleus, or I should say the malleus bone, okay, is a little bit longer than the long process of the incus. Think of the malleus, incus, and then a little stapes bone here at my elbow. And this arm is a little bit longer than this arm. So you're increasing the pressure, just like a seesaw or teeter-totter. You give the long end to the littler kid, because then that kid, then you'll balance each other. If you think of a lever, you're trying to lift up something heavy. You have a fulcrum here, you have a long handle, you can easily lift something with the short end. Okay, you've got an advantage. The jack of a car, okay? So that's the leverage action of the middle ear ossicles. And the third way is known as the buckling action of the tympanic membrane itself. And due to the conical shape of the tympanic membrane, it increases the force by a factor of 2. And let's get a picture of it so we can see it better as a picture. Much better. Okay? So, look at the size of the drum compared to the footplate of the stapes. This is 17 times larger than this. So the middle ear increases sound pressure level of airborne sound so it can activate a fluid-filled cochlea. How does it do it? 3 ways. Number 1, size of the drum compared to footplate of the stapes. That's why I drew number 1 and number 1. Number 2, the malleus bone is slightly longer than the long process of the incus. How much longer? 1.3 to 1. If this is a 1, this would be 1.3. Slightly longer. Okay? And when you're thinking of the malleus and the incus, think of the fulcrum as right here. That's the twisting point. And this malleus is a little bit longer than the long process of the incus. So that leverage action increases pressure by a factor of 1.3 to 1. And then last of all, look at number 3. You have the buckling action of the tympanic membrane right here. Okay? I'll just highlight that again. See, notice how the eardrum doesn't move all uniform. It's stuck at the end here, and at this end over here, and at the umbel, but you can see the buckling action, those dashed lines. And that increases the pressure by a factor of 2 to 1. So when you've done that, basically, let's just summarize here. You got a big eardrum squeezing onto a smaller footplate of the stapes in the oval window. That's number 1. Then there's the leverage action, the fact that the malleus is a little bit longer than the incus. That increases the pressure by a factor of 1.3 to 1. Here's showing you the same picture here as here. This is the fulcrum. The malleus is a little bit longer than the long process of the incus, so that's factor number 2. Showing you here again, pressure lifting mass. If this handle is longer, you've got a pressure increase lifting this mass. Helps. And third, the buckling action of the tympanic membrane. The fact that the eardrum does not move all uniformly. Okay, this part here moves more, and this part here moves more. This buckling action doubles the movement of the malleus bone behind it. So in summary, you have a pressure increase of 17 to 1 times 1.3 to 1 times 2 to 1, and you add those all up together, you've got a sound pressure increase of 44 to 1. What does that mean in English? We'll finish with this slide. And you're going to learn this in acoustics for all those who are taking Acoustics 110. Okay, you're going to learn this next week. So here we go. But for those of you who aren't, let's just summarize here. Every time you increase the pressure, the sound pressure, okay, the pressure of sound hitting something, if you increase that pressure by a factor of 10, you go up 20 decibels. If I increase the pressure by a factor of 100, so some tiny little pressure or a sound pressure 100 times as much, I've gone up 40 decibels. If I increase the sound pressure by 1,000-fold, I've gone up 60 decibels. If I increase it by 10,000-fold, I've gone up 80. By 100,000 times, I've gone up 100. And by 1,000,000 times pressure, I've gone up 120 decibels. Okay? The decibel from hell is based on logarithms on base 10. FNO, freak not out. Stick to Snickers. Don't worry. The bottom line is this. Look what the middle ear is doing. 1, 2, 3. The 3 ways in which it overcomes the impedance mismatch, which are jotted right down in your notes here. I'm just describing it right here. Okay? All of this stuff that I'm highlighting in bluish gray here is said and summarized right here. The 3 ways in which it does it: increases pressure by 44 to 1. Well, 44 to 1 in orange, that's somewhere between 10 and 100, isn't it? And if you did the math, you'd find out that the middle ear therefore increases the decibels by about 30 to 35 decibels. The middle ear increases sound pressure by a factor of 44 to 1, and when you convert that to decibels, that's a 30 to 35 decibel increase. That's why when you take the tuning fork and you thong and you put it against the mastoid bone, yeah, you'll hear it, but pull it away and whoa, that's louder. How much louder? 30 to 35 dB louder. That's how much louder. Okay, the Rene tuning fork nicely demonstrating the beautiful purpose and privilege offered by the middle ear. All right, well, that's your Unit 3, the start of Unit 3 in Anatomy, HEAR 120. We will finish off the middle ear next week. We'll talk a little bit about disorders, but not that much. You have more on HEAR 125 this summer, hearing disorders, and we'll cover lots of outer disorders, middle ear disorders, inner disorders. But for right now, what we need to focus on in anatomy is what's normal. Because if you go to a doctor with a bad knee, the doctor's first going to look at your good knee to find out what's normal for you, right? And then look at your bad knee. So at any rate, we need to know what's normal first before we talk about what's abnormal. And that's what we're doing in this course. We're focusing on what's normal. So we're covering the normal outer ear and the normal middle ear. We'll make some passing references to some pathology, but know those 2 tuning fork tests. Know that the middle ear transduces sound waves into mechanical energy, and also that it overcomes the impedance mismatch between air and fluid, and it does so in 3 ways, offering then finally a 44 to 1 pressure increase, which translates in a 30 to 35 decibel increase. And that increase is experienced by the Rene tuning fork test. Google up the Bing tuning fork test and Google up Rene tuning fork test just for the hell of it. It's good for you. And you'll see pictures of it and you'll get a better handle on what I mean. Anyway, adios. It's been a slice. I will stop recording and we will see you all next week. Live long and prosper. Adios.